Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. So I just started off my day by speaking with the State Board of Education nearby. They are having one of their regular meetings. I spoke to them directly about the executive order that I am announcing today that I want to talk about. I believe it's incredibly important for our students and our families that I take action today to protect the instructional time in the classroom for our students across the state. Right now, a number of school districts are facing tough budget decisions. And in some cases, that could mean less classroom time for our students. But that instructional time is critical for our students. Students in our state already spend less time in the classroom than most students in the country. In fact, fewer hours in all but a handful of states. We have to do better by our kids, and I think we can do that. That's why I have this executive order in front of us today. There is urgency because school boards are making decisions this month and next about the upcoming school year. We need to protect and restore instructional time for our students. This is about prioritizing the academic outcomes and the student well-being to ensure that every student has access to consistent, high-quality learning. So let me tell you what the executive order does for our students. First, the order preserves current student instructional time and protects that time from further cuts. Districts who have already made the hard decision to reduce time this year or in the coming school year must submit plans to the state that show how they will restore that lost instructional time by the 2027-28 school year. It sets the expectation to maintain a baseline so more students do not lose valuable time with their teachers and their peers. We simply cannot backslide on the instructional hours we have. We don't have enough of them, and we certainly can't go backwards. Second, this executive order ends the state's instructional time waivers that allow districts to fall below the minimum required hours of instructional time, except in the cases of declared emergencies. I won't be issuing any more waivers for districts. And third, this executive order makes a point to refocus time on classroom learning for instructional time, ensuring that our instructional hours mean actual hours spent between students and educators. We know that too many of our students are not getting the time in the classroom that they need to succeed. We can simply not get better student outcomes if we continue to give our students less instructional time. Research shows us that reduced instructional time negatively impacts student learning, particularly for students already facing disparities, which widens the gap we all know we have to close. Protecting and strengthening our student time in the classroom is essential to improving student achievement and setting up our kids for long-term success. My executive order aims to expand opportunities for academic growth while supporting the social, emotional, and behavioral development of our students. I know that our local school districts are facing some very hard choices. And I want our school leaders and our educators to know that I understand these are hard decisions that you are tasked with making at the local level. I know you're working in a complex economic environment, and I know resources are constrained. And I know that the path forward won't necessarily be simple or easy. But I also know, as you all do, that our kids are worth it. The future of Oregon is worth it, and sometimes as leaders, we must do the hard thing, especially when it's the right thing to do. Sometimes we're going to have to work with what we have and find a way forward. The state is committed, and I am committed to being a partner with our school districts in finding solutions that work for their communities while also protecting what matters most, and that is time for students to learn. So I have with me today two individuals to also provide some comments. We have Kate Lupton, who is a parent, who's going to provide a parent perspective. And then we have Sarah Pope with us who is our Oregon Executive Director of STAND for Children, who provide more data to share around this executive order. So, Ms. Lupton.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Kate Lupton. I'm honored to be here to speak today on a momentous day that I feel like is a great step in the right direction towards getting more instructional hours for our students here in public schools in Oregon. I am a Spanish language educator by trade, and I'm a passionate advocate for all students in public schools here. I have 3 precocious little ones, Amelia, who's 6, James, who's 4, and Sophie, who's 2. Amelia and James are at school today in Lake Oswego, and I dropped off my 2-year-old Sophie with my parents this morning at my childhood home. I grew up about a mile from here, and I attended Inglewood Elementary School, Parish Middle School, and North Salem High School. And my parents still live in the house that I grew up in, and so Sophie's playing there this morning. I attended, as I said, I attended K-12 here in Salem. And my parents, Lori and Joe, were both public school teachers. My dad taught chemistry and coached track and field, and my mom taught special ed. She wrote IEPs and helped middle school students how to read at Barbara Roberts High School. My parents were idealists, and a few years ago they told me this story about when they bought a house in Salem in the 1980s. Their realtor at the time warned them not to purchase that house. It was on a tree-lined street. It was only a mile from the state capitol, but apparently the quality of education wasn't at North Salem, and those schools around that house weren't acceptable in that realtor's perspective. But my parents were young and they're idealistic and they're public school teachers, and they didn't want to believe that the quality of their children's public school education was based on a zip code. But as a K-12 student in Salem, I did grieve some of my losses of academic challenge. I did the TAG program, and I felt like I never quite got the challenge I was looking for. But I did get to go to University of Oregon, and then I taught for 2 years at a public school in Madrid, and I had that experience. Then I joined Teach for America in inner city Baltimore, and that's where I had this really big realization. I taught at a public high school there, and I taught Spanish 1 and 2 to high schoolers. I also completed a Master's of Education at Hopkins University, and I learned a lot about educational equity while I was there. Despite the many challenges facing Baltimore City at the time, what I was really floored by was the incredible public school education that my high school students in Baltimore were receiving. They were learning complex mathematics, studying the rich history of the civil rights movement, and they were speaking Spanish with incredible proficiency. And if I'm honest, I was jealous. My public school kids were receiving the education that I had always craved, and they were in the classroom for at least 180 days every school year. So once I realized all of this, and also as a high school teacher, I was in school a lot more than I had remembered being as a student growing up. So as a teacher, I wasn't able to go home for Thanksgiving, for example, because I was in school teaching Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of that week. And also conferences were held after school. There wasn't a day off, so it was a big work day for teachers. And to me, it was shocking, but I realized it was all for the greater good of this 180 instructional days for students. So moving back to Oregon was essential for me because once you live in a place like Oregon with old growth forests and gorgeous trees, you can't live anywhere else. So I moved back, bought a house in Lake Oswego, and I started to realize that the big differences here in instructional time that we have in Oregon versus other states like Maryland, that is something we can fix. That is something we can reach for. And here, with this executive order, we have the opportunity to take that first step towards 180 instructional days for all public school students, and we can stop reducing our already short school year. Thank you. This is Sarah Pope, and she'll be speaking as well.
Thank you, Kate.
Good morning, and thank you to the governor for your leadership, and thank you, Kate Lepton from Lake Oswego. I'm Sarah Pope, the executive director of Stand for Children Oregon. So for decades, Oregon's children have been getting shortchanged when it comes to the length of the school year, which is why the governor's actions today are a really important first step in getting our children the time they deserve. See, a few years ago, Stand for Children worked to align Oregon's literacy instruction with the research. We worked with the governor and others with the passage of the Early Literacy Success Initiative. And Oregon made a commitment to early literacy. And then at STAND, we worked with educators, and we started hearing there aren't enough hours in the day or days in the year to implement the new literacy curriculum. That question led us to partner with Echo Northwest to take a look at how much time Oregon students spend in school and how that compares nationally. What they found was stark. Oregon ranks 47th in the nation for time in school. By graduation, the average Oregon student will attend 195 fewer school days than students across the country. That's one full academic year. And within our own state, the differences can be even more extreme. Students in the lowest time districts can receive 3 fewer school years than those in the highest time districts. And here's an important point. Districts aren't breaking the rules. This is how the system has been designed. Oregon has set one of the lowest requirements for instructional time, and the rule allows wide flexibility. When children are not in school, some of those hours can count towards the total. The results are overall short school years with significant variation for children across our state. And these school years have historically gotten shorter during budget reductions. But Echo Northwest didn't just document the problem, they modeled what happens if we fix it. Their analysis shows that more instructional time pays off over time. If students consistently receive more learning time year after year, and we cut our chronic absenteeism rates back to our pre-pandemic levels, Oregon could move from the bottom of the nation in literacy to the top by 8th grade. This is a solvable problem and one that requires statewide action. That action starts with protecting the time we have, which is why the governor's actions today are an important first step for Oregon's 500,000 public school children. With that, I will turn it back to the governor. Thank you, sir.
All right, so we'll start the Q&A portion. Just a reminder to everyone, we've got this airplane level HVAC in the room, so if everyone can speak up, we'll be able to hear you much more clearly. So if we want to start in the room, sure.
Governor, I know that this particular executive order is about preserving time, but both of the other speakers talked about increasing, trying to get up to 180. Is that something that you're working on? And are there discussions to even switch from the hours to the days requirement?
Well, here's where we're starting today. We cannot lose any more time. That we have to protect what we have. And why I'm acting today with this executive order is I'm hearing from district after district that they're looking at their budget situation and they're thinking about providing even less time. So we got to stop the bleeding. We have to stop reducing instructional time. We got to set that floor and say, we got to stop. This is going to start a conversation of where do we get more instructional time into our schools and what is it going to cost? I know some districts are going to say, you're asking us to do things we can't afford. We can't afford not to stop losing instructional hours. So this executive order says, stop, and let's grow to something we can achieve. And that is the future conversation we have to have. But the clearly to our districts today is, we can't cut any more hours. We got to come up with other solutions within the existing budgets we have.
Virtual question coming from Rogue Valley Times. Buffy Pollock is asking, what is being done to help stabilize funding for early learning programs as we keep seeing additional federal cuts? The city of Medford this week invested $1.5 million to help expand a regional preschool program. Jackson County has a 40% availability rating, which is barely above 33% level, considered to be child care desert.
Okay, a couple responses there. One, thank you to the local government that is stepping up to help with that situation. Number two, we are pushing back on the Trump administration. Every single time they don't want to send our federal tax dollars back to our state, they've tried to cut Head Start, we've said no. They've tried to cut child care dollars, we've said no. So we're pushing back on that. I have formed a new roundtable, the Early Learning Care and Education Roundtable, that is looking at how we can increase access to the programs we currently have for our youngest Oregonians? How do we improve infant toddler care across the state? And how do we as a state get to universal preschool? That's going to take a couple years, but we need to get there as a state to make sure every child is ready to learn when they enter kindergarten. The other thing I would say is I have fought for more dollars in the state. In 2019, we increased and created the corporate activities tax, which is currently funding our early learning programs across the state and has allowed us to bring almost $3 billion more this biennium into our schools. There are always going to be resource challenges, but we have to use every dollar that we have as effectively as possible while we fight for more and protect what money should be coming to the state.
Thanks for taking our questions today, Governor. So as I'm sure you've heard from Oregon superintendents or perhaps their labor partners, the alternative to furloughs is often layoffs. And yet, Oregon, as you know, Oregon schools have lost about 45,000 students since prior to the pandemic, while having added about 11,000 school employees. That's according to the report card that the State Department of Ed assembles. So, I mean, are you essentially saying here that school staffing has grown to levels that are unsustainable?
I am not saying that. What I am saying is these decisions at the local level have to take into account what we need to be striving for, which is as much instructional time as we can possibly have. And like I said, we cannot go backwards. We're already too little in what we're doing in the classroom for our students. I also want to say I have been fighting for a solid state school fund since I've been in office. And because of the reset on the current service level, how we calculate the state school fund, it would have been $600 million less if I had not intervened a year ago to establish a strong 2-year budget for our schools. And because the legislature acted, and I supported their actions with not connecting to some of the federal tax cuts put forth by the Trump administration, we have not cut any of the state school fund dollars for this biennium. Now, I know districts have some challenges. It is a district by district situation, and I do not have complete transparency on the choices that our districts need to make. That is up to their elected school leaders. But what I do want to send a message is that cannot be on the backs of students for instructional time when you make those choices.
If I could just quickly follow up, in terms of complete transparency, one thing that might help with that is a statewide salary schedule or even perhaps statewide bargaining. Can you tell us your position on that?
Well, when I came in to this office, I focused on, like I said, fixing the current service level calculation so we can have certainty for our districts of what they could be expecting from the state as a partner in their funding. One of the conversations that also happened at the same time was this idea of a statewide salary schedule and things like that. That work group did not reach conclusion. I fully expect that we will be back on that conversation.
Lucas?
Virtual question from Jim Neff at Oregon Journalism Project. Should Oregon require kids to attend full-day kindergarten? Why or why not?
We have been successful here in the state of making sure we can fund full-day kindergarten. I was in the legislature when that decision was made, and we have funded that. And primarily, that has been supported in funding because of the corporate activities tax that was established under the Student Success Act in 2019. This is a parent choice. This is, for those who are parents, when you're making that decision of when your child should start school and go into kindergarten, that is a discussion we have not had in the state of whether we want to make that mandatory. I think most parents understand that that is good for their child and will do that. Our job as the state is to make sure there is high quality early learning as well as kindergarten programs when that parent makes the decision to send their kid to kindergarten.
Liz?
Hi, thank you, Governor. So I wanted to ask about, I'm sure what you're going to hear from superintendents is what are we going to do instead of instructional time? And so one question that I have for you is there any plan or interest or effort to tap into that education stability fund or any other emergency funding opportunity?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So in the session that just wrapped up, it was important for legislators and for me that we did not cut education funding in the face of a budget deficit caused by federal actions. So we were successful there. The legislature said, here's how we're going to fund schools. Schools have not been cut from the state's perspective. I know there's a call for tapping into the Education Stability Fund. That would take legislative leadership and decision to do that. I am not hearing that from our legislators. And the other thing I would say is when you tap into those funds, they would be distributed across all school districts. Not every school district is having similar budgetary challenges. So it is up to our local leaders to look at what they're doing and decide how they can make things work based on the increased resources the state has given them.
What safeguards ensure this isn't just more time, but more effective time?
That's a good question, right? So what we know is if you're in the classroom with a high-quality teacher, that is going to be good for students. Well, if a student's not even in the classroom, then we know that is a challenge. So we're focusing on that absenteeism challenge we have in the state, so getting students into school and getting them into the classroom. And also with the work I've done in banning cell phones, we are seeing more engaged students in the classroom. So it's not one thing that's going to improve outcomes, but by getting students in the classroom, not cutting their instructional time, and helping the teachers have quality time with those students, we're going to see better outcomes.
And just a quick follow-up, how do you expect to enforce this? What happens to a district if they do not present this plan for 2027-28?
Well, as a superintendent of public instruction, I am directing the State Board of Education to put in emergency rulemaking now. They are subject to the rules under administrative rule. The State Board is taking that up today. And the department will immediately reach out to districts who have had to reduce instructional hours to say, you've got 90 days to come up with a plan to tell us how you're going to fix this. Well, here's what I would say to all Oregonians. This is the beginning of a very important conversation. Are we going to prioritize instructional time? If we are, how are we going to do it? And if it's a resource challenge, how are we going to pay for it? But we have to not go backwards anymore. We have to only go forward.
Lucas?
Next question comes from Alex Baumhart from Capital Chronicle. Districts said the state's over-reliance on federal poverty estimates in the school funding formula as opposed to actual DHS data that districts and ODE use to count their students experiencing poverty is cutting unfairly into their budgets. Salem Kaiser, for instance, just learned they are out $5 million because of some pretty anomalous federal poverty estimates. ODE says ending use of Fed estimates is up to the legislature. Will you press the legislature to do this?
I think we have to recalculate how we're looking at poverty statistics to make sure districts with the most economically challenged families get the help they need. So I am open to that conversation, just as I'm open to the conversation of setting performance standards, which the State Board is also taking up today, and instructional time. This is the message. It's not one thing that's going to improve our schools. We have to take on all of it, and I think that funding formula around poverty has to be considered.
Governor, about those performance standards, there's been some pushback around the 8th grade math standard, given that it's a pretty big jump from where we are now. But my question is really about why you feel and why Oregon feels it's more effective to allow local districts to set their own performance targets rather than holding everybody to a set of statewide goals.
We have a lot of respect for local control in this state, so I am resetting the balance, I think, though, between state and local school districts by saying we're going to have statewide accountability standards. We're going to have performance measures that you are going to be held accountable to. How they work on that to get to those goals at the local school level, that's got to be up to them. They know their schools best. But the goal is to get to those targets, and we have to stretch ourselves. I know people are nervous, but we have to stretch because that's what our students deserve. And under the bill that was passed last year, if folks are not meeting the targets that we have set and the targets they have set internally, there will be conversations with school districts.
Lucas? Virtual question from Nigel Jaquis. As Speaker, you helped pass the Student Success Act. That's put $1.5 billion a year of new money into schools, yet outcomes are worse. First, what is your assessment of current outcomes? Second, what's your reaction to outcomes worsening despite the new, much larger investment?
Well, the outcomes in the state, as you see in the executive order, are unacceptable, and that's why we have to do everything we can, and that includes more instructional hours. I think what we're seeing, and we continue to see in our school districts, is a reset post-pandemic. We lost time on how those investments could be improving student outcomes. We got to get back to understanding how individual districts are using their student success dollars in the way they were intended to preserve outcomes and protect and expand those outcomes. We have work to do, but it's good to know that those dollars that have been put into our schools are trending in the right direction. They've gone from $2 billion a biennium to $3 billion a biennium. Now we have to have the performance conversations with our school districts to hit better outcomes for our students.
Richard?
What would you want to tell both parents and taxpayers? We want to stop the bleeding and increase hours. How do you, especially when every time we have a meeting, budget cuts. How do you expect to get that across, and how do you expect that conversation to go?
These are hard decisions for individual school districts. My message to parents is ask for what you need for your students and say to your board leaders, do not cut instructional time. My kids need to be in the classroom. And that how you count instructional time should be about that face-to-face contact with my child. Board members need to hear that so they can do what they need to do to prioritize the dollars in their district to protect instructional time.
Does your office, well, a question for you, and then I'd love to get Kate's perspective on this. Does your office have a sense of how many districts have cut instructional time this year? And then for you, Kate, if you could talk about how it affects your children when they don't have school.
We can get you the information on the districts. I know it's at least a half dozen, but we'll get you the actual districts. So appreciate the question. Kate. Oh, you want to come to the mic?
Of course. Thank you for the question. So the interesting part about that is that since I'm in the Lake Oswego School District boundaries, we actually have a very robust system where we've been using the bonds and the levies to our advantage for years. And so the funding that we receive from our area is actually greater than a lot of districts across Oregon. And so when we saw budget cuts hit last year, we made cuts. And now in Lake Oswego, we are able to keep everything the same. So we have the same instructional days that we did last year, and we have the same teachers. We're not making cuts. And so that's due to some really strong leadership in Lake Oswego. Superintendent Jen Sheely is a really inspired leader, and then she has a great financial director named Stuart Ketzler, and he has really helped guide our district in the right direction. But it's complicated because we don't, not every district has that.
And I think that's why you're seeing at least two districts, I think, Canby is one, I don't remember the other, that are pursuing operational levies before voters this year to help them supplement for their dollars locally.
May I add?
Yeah.
I know Liz didn't ask me this question, but just a quick add. So when we looked at how much instructional time is occurring, across the state, I think one thing we were surprised at is how variable it is within Oregon. And we have regions in every quadrant of our state that are high and are low. And I think the question that we need to ask ourselves is how is that possible when we have supposedly equalized funding? And I think Lake Oswego is actually a really interesting example. It's been great. They had to reduce instructional time this year. They haven't done it, period. But when you actually look at districts like Lake Oswego, they are on average lower than other districts in the metro area. And so this variability is very extreme, and we see it, like I said, in every quadrant of the state. So I just wanted to add that context.
A couple that are non-education related.
Any other education questions in the room?
I would just make a statement. I think it's really important to make sure that when you're a student in the state of Oregon and your family moves or you come from a different part of the state, that you can expect a standard of access to the classroom, high quality instruction, the right type of instruction. What we're trying to achieve here, even with local decision making, is a standard that is better than we have today, and we have to dream bigger for our students across the state, and this variation has to be addressed. That is, we need all of our districts to be marching in the same direction for the best interest of our students, no matter where you live in the state.
So piggybacking on that, Governor, and on what Sarah said, I've done some reporting about this, and agree, was pretty surprised to see the enormous variations, at least among Portland metro area districts. I'm wondering if, let's say you take one of those districts that is at the high end, that is, because they exist, that are offering significantly more instructional hours than others. Are they, quote unquote, allowed to have furlough days even if they are at the very high end of what is being offered? It's a little technical, I apologize.
So we have in state rule a minimum number of instructional hours based on elementary, middle, and high. I don't want everyone to think, oh, the basement is just fine. So if you are above those numbers right now, I challenge every district not to go below where you are today. That is the goal. The goal is to go up, not to go back, regardless of where you are today.
Non-education related question from Alex Baumhart. What are you going to do on House Bill 4177?
I will need to make a decision by tomorrow.
Any questions in the room not on education? And back to you, Lucas.
Another one we have from Buffy Pollock is about American Rivers recently released a report naming the Rogue River the 5th most endangered river in the U.S. Do you have any thoughts you'd share on how it got to that point and what needs to happen to mitigate impacts to the health of the river?
I will have to follow up on that. We love the Rogue. All of us do, who have ever experienced time on the Rogue. And I know there's a lot of local conversations to understand how we can affect the status that she's talking about or they're talking about. So we'll have to get back to you on what's been happening. I know there's some things, but I don't want to get ahead of myself until I talk to some people.
Yeah, let's see.
Just a question about the gas tax, gas prices in general. You said that you're not going to be suspending any state gas taxes amid these high prices. How do you sell Oregonians on this this gas tax referendum vote with these gas prices so high right now?
Well, first of all, I think it's up to the federal government, who has created the chaos in the Middle East that's causing gas prices to go up, that they could consider reducing the federal gas tax if they want to provide any relief at the pump for Americans. So I'm just going to say that up front. Certainly the conversation at the ballot this year on whether or not any increase in the gas tax to help maintain our roads and highways is a tough sell right now because I think everyone is feeling the pinch on their household budgets. No matter what happens in May, we have to turn around as a state and say, what do we want to see in our state for transportation? And the group I've put together will be having a proposal by the end of the year to make sure we can go forward as a state to pay for the transportation system we all need to have, regardless of what happens at the vote next month.
All right, maybe 2 more questions. Any last question in the room? Liz.
I just figured since we're here talking about education, I know that was one of your 3 priorities when you were elected. And if you could kind of rate how it's gone, how you think you've done on this job of education and outcomes for students.
I appreciate that question. Well, we definitely have stabilized the ship. Our graduation rates are up. The investments with working with the legislature for the early literacy initiative, summer learning programs, we have done some increased targeted funding. We have not cut the state school funds in the state. In fact, we have increased it. So I think we're doing our part to stabilize post-pandemic. But now we got to get down in the nitty-gritty of the things of how do we improve attendance? How do we improve the number of instructional hours? How do we make sure that we're all driving towards the same performance standards for our districts? So we have stabilized, we're going to build higher, we're going to dream bigger, and that is something we have to look forward to. And I need everyone, every Oregonian, being committed to that because we should have the best schools for our students.
All right, Lucas, last question.
No more virtuals.
Then that was the last question. All right, thanks everybody.
So thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. Thank you.